Ladies and gentlemen, my name is TotalBiscuit. I'm here to ask and answer one simple question. WTF is The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Are you confused by the reboots yet? I'm getting there, that's for sure. It's not, in fact, Spider-Man 2, which was an incredible game on the PS2, if you hadn't already realized. Nor is it Ultimate Spider-Man, nor is it based on any of the first three movies, because now they're doing other movies because licensing issues and such. I have honestly lost track. I'm gonna be frank with you there. I am lacking the caring modules, nor indeed the subroutines. But whatever the case, it's a Spider-Man game, it's an open-world Marvel adventure, which is usually a fairly good time. It's by a company called Beanox, which is amusing in and of itself, at least for a few seconds anyway. Especially when you consider that they were the masterminds behind B-Movie, the game. Yeah. They did actually quite a lot of movie-based shovelware until they were moved on by Activision to the Spider-Man franchise, and they have been responsible for 4 Spider-Man games, including this one, Shattered Dimensions, Edge of Time, Amazing Spider-Man, and Amazing Spider-Man 2. Now, none of those Spider-Man games were considered to be incredibly good, unfortunately, which kinda sucks. Before that, they did Guitar Hero smash hits, Monsters vs. Aliens, probably the most obscure title was Pillars of Garandol. They also did the Cold Stone game engine for macOS. So yeah, they used to actually be a Mac developer, which is very strange. They're now working on Skylanders Trap Team. I believe that's a collaborative effort for the next Skylanders game. And in the meantime, they bring us this. Now, the first Amazing Spider-Man game, it was okay. I mean, it was alright. It's not one of those games that I would go out and say, wow, that was an incredible open-world superhero experience, because it's not. It had its moments, but it also had many problems, including the idea that you can web swing from fricking nothing, which is very confusing, considering that if you look back at the previous Spider-Man games, particularly Spider-Man 2, they had a very, very good way of doing it, and they decided, you know what, we're going to abandon that entirely for no good reason. Well, this one kind of brings things back to the old school just a little bit. It's not the same as the web-swinging system from Spider-Man 2, at all, but it feels a lot better than the one from The Amazing Spider-Man, I've got to say that. Now, if we head to the browser menu... Browser menu? No. Settings menu. What you will see is that it's lacking lots of things. That's because they decided to go with a launcher. Now, usually I don't mind too much when it comes to launchers, unless the game has performance problems, in which case I hate launchers. Why do I hate launchers? Because that means you have to relaunch the game every bloody time you want to make a change to try and diagnose what the bloody problem is. And I can't even find the bloody problem, and have restarted this game about 20 plus times in order to mess around with the settings, you know? You've got to eliminate each possibility one at a time, otherwise it gets confusing, so I kept trying, and oh my god, it was a pain in the ass. So I'm not really sure what's going on with that. Outside of that, you can, thankfully, navigate with the mouse and you can set your difficulty. Superhero might be a decent idea, although you might find that a lot of the fights with a lot of guns in them get very frustrating if you go to superhero level, so just bear that in mind. The melee fights are absolutely just cake on hero, but there's a definite difference between melee enemies and armed, ranged enemies. Controls, this is the control scheme. You can rebind the keys in the launcher. And indeed, surprisingly enough, the rebind actually allows for the use of key modifiers, which is unusual. A lot of games don't allow that. They just say, well, press this button. But no, you can actually do key modifiers, multiple key modifiers, in fact, which is neat because, like, the default for swinging is actually a 3-button combination, strangely enough. If I recall correctly, it's like... It's something along the lines of, like, Shift and A and mouse click, or something like that. I don't really remember it too much anymore, because I switched over to pad about 2 hours in, and I haven't really looked back, but... The keyboard and mouse controls are functional. You can certainly make them work. You're not really disadvantaged if you decide to go with them, considering the web-swinging system has a very high tolerance for errors, so, you know, it will let you get away with quite a lot. And once you learn the key combos, it's not really that difficult. I did notice what appears to be either mouse acceleration or badly configured camera sensitivity. It's hard to tell which these days. Who the hell knows? So you might get a little bit annoyed by that. But outside of that, it is playable with the keyboard and mouse, but it is definitely one of those games where I'd recommend a pad. In particular, considering web swinging with the pad is just the right and left triggers, which feels extremely natural, and it makes a lot of sense. And frankly, these third-person character action games... especially when you don't have any kind of ranged combat involved in them, do suit the controller quite well. Yeah, I've said it many times before, I think that while I do believe every game should be optimized to the best of the developer's ability when it comes to keyboard and mouse, and I will criticize any developer that doesn't do that to the best of their ability, even if you nail it 100%, there are some genres which still work better with a pad, you know, just as in the same way that racing games work better with a racing wheel, and fighting games work better with a fight stick. It's just the way of it. Thankfully, we're on PC. We can plug whatever we want into our computers, and we should take that opportunity whenever possible to configure our experience, because that's what being a PC owner is all about. Making choices and configuring your experience, rather than being locked into one particular way of doing things. Okay, so I've rattled on about that quite enough. Let's get into the game. I'm going to stick to side missions, unless it forces me not to, and every now and again it does. But obviously I don't want to provide any spoilers. This is about 4 hours into the game, and I'll show you my completion rate to show you how far I am through it. And then we'll go from there, and we'll just have a look and see what's going on. As I said, I will play the rest of this with the pad. Although I might switch to keyboard and mouse in the middle of it, just to maybe show you the difference. It's not really a huge difference, assuming I can remember the key configurations. If I can't, then so things are not going to go all that well. Alright, let's get in, shall we? Alright, so welcome to New York, or at least Spider-Man's interpretation of it. And also, welcome to a game that does not run that well. So this is the first big criticism that I've got about Amazing Spider-Man 2. The game runs like arse. On a computer that costs as much as a small car. That's a bit of a problem. So, frame rate. That's the real issue here. So it's locked to 60 frames per second, but you shouldn't be too worried about that, because chances are you aren't going to hit it most of the time. As I mentioned earlier, I did go in and out of the configuration menu over and over and over again to try and figure out what exactly it was that was nuking the frame rate, but I can't find it. I have tried it with one Titan on, SLI disabled. I've tried it with two Titans on, SLI enabled. There was no frame rate difference between the two, indicating that the game does not support SLI. Which is going to be a problem for those of you, of course, that use SLI. I thought, hey, okay, right, it's an inefficient port, maybe I can just give it some more horsepower. Nope, game doesn't support that. So, that's lovely. And what's most annoying about that is that the game has no justification for that at all. Because, frankly, it doesn't look that good. The character models are okay, but if you get in close, you'll notice that the texture quality is, let's just say, very much last generation. Very much so. The texture on the actual buildings, pretty piss poor. Very muddy. Certainly not crisp or high definition. Obviously, like, being at night doesn't help, but I mean, even if you look at the nighttime, the lighting effects are really, really basic. In 2014, you would certainly expect some nice lighting effects. I mean, hell, you want to see some lighting effects in action? You can go a couple of years back and play Sleeping Dogs, which has incredible nighttime effects. You know, that's a great example of a game that did a phenomenal job with making a city really interesting. Frankly, outside of the Central Park area, this game is a lot of gray buildings. Lots and lots of grey buildings and very little else. It makes New York look incredibly dull. Definitely looks better in the daytime than it does in the nighttime, I'll certainly say that, but this is not a great representation of New York City. If you like greys and browns, well, we've got that. If you also like very, very blurry buildings in the distance, we've got that as well, even on the highest level of draw distance. That said, with the frame rate problems being the way that they... God damn it. Bear in mind, Spider-Man can't swim for whatever reason. Bearing in mind the frame rate doesn't go that high anyway, it's probably for the best that the view distance isn't too great. Even with 16 times anisotropic filtering on, it still looks pretty blurry and lacks definition at a distance. There's also things like vehicle pop-in. Not that that's all that important, because you're not going to be interacting with vehicles all that much in any way. They're pretty much just window dressing outside of the car chase sequences, but... yeah, it is... not a great looking game, nor does it run very well, which is kind of almost an immediate condemnation, and rightfully so, I think, because, frankly, a game that looks this terrible should not be running as badly as this is. But it is. Alright, so what does the actual game consist of? Well, I think you can probably tell just by looking at it. It's an open world game. What does that mean? Main story missions that it will constantly harass you to do, and then side missions. which consists of a number of different things: beating up petty thugs, rescuing people from fires, car chasers, well, I'd say defusing bombs, but that's not true. Actually getting bombs and throwing them into the water, which I have yet to figure out how to actually do, and I've failed that mission multiple times as a direct result of that, because I get up to the water and it just nothing happens. It's like, how do I get rid of it? I have no idea. Okay, let's get through this, and let's get some of these guys out. Some of the fire rescue missions are actually pretty damn tough, frankly. There we go. Simply because they put them in pretty awkward spots. Some of them are fairly easy, but usually you can use your spider sense to try and find them. But it can still be a little bit difficult, considering you can't get into some rooms, you can get into others. That and spider sense actually makes it kind of difficult to find your way through. You don't get a lot of time to do it either. Alright. Alright, so we have one here. Let's get him out of the way. There we go. And then try and get the last one out. So, why would you do this? Well, one, experience, obviously, as you might imagine. Two, it's because it's what most of the game is, far as I'm concerned. There's not really enough to do otherwise. The main story missions don't actually take too long. In fact, I've seen many people say they beat the game in 4 hours. I can believe it. I can absolutely believe it. If we look at the start menu, look at my global progression. After about 4 hours, I'm on 6 out of 14, and I have been going out of my way to do a lot of the side missions. Now, it doesn't represent them in the stats, which is really weird. It only tracks things like Oscorp crates or the combat challenges, which you can only access by going into the comic book store and playing on the arcade machine. Jameson's photo missions, photo investigations, doing hideouts, and so on and so forth. But it doesn't count doing the petty crime stuff, because the game generates that. I wouldn't call it randomly, but there's definitely some element to it. It seems to spawn it at random places around the city, and you have a certain amount of time to get there and deal with it. And if you don't, what happens is you become a menace, yeah? So I would call it an alignment system, but I don't think that's actually doing justice to the term alignment system. God damn it. I don't know why it stuck me to the wall there, either. Basically, if you do not complete these missions in time, then the Daily Bugle will condemn you as a menace for your inaction, which is kind of hilarious in and of itself. And, you know, it kind of fits, in fact, it does fit thematically very much so with the constant media battle that Spider-Man is having to deal with the Daily Bugle and J. Jonah Jameson. I get that from the comics themselves. That's cool. But the system means that what's going to happen to you is you will lose buffs for being a hero if you do not manage to keep up with the crime levels in the city. Now, that's annoying in and of itself, because some of these buffs can be really significant. I'm talking like plus 50% damage and all sorts of things like that, depending on which suit you're wearing and what level your suit is. The most annoying thing about it, though, is about an hour into the game, a special task force arrives with a bunch of really high-tech gear, including drones and flying gliders, to deal with the gang war that's currently going on in the city. And as long as you are considered a hero, they'll ignore you. If you become a menace, they will hunt you the hell down, and it's really annoying to deal with. I mean, dealing with people that are flying is a pain in the arse. So, if you become a menace at any point, the game becomes a massive nuisance, which is really annoying. Now, the main problem with it is the timing involves you trying to find these missions and getting involved in them before the actual timer goes away, and then you immediately get blamed as a result. You also get menace points for failing a mission. Now, that I get. That I think is reasonable. Where on earth am I going here? I guess it's up here somewhere. What's more annoying is that you have to get in a very specific part of the map in order to activate it. You don't just have to be around it. It even teleports you there as well, which is it's kind of strange, actually. Frankly, a lot of the missions do the whole teleport you around the map thing, which I think is unnecessary and very disjointed for an open world game. But finding them is difficult enough. Getting there in time could be a real pain in the ass, and the crimes still go on while you are doing the main missions. Now, there are two arguments to be made here. The first is that makes sense from an authenticity standpoint and just in common sense in general. You can't be everywhere at once. It's reasonable that if you're doing a main mission, you're going to let some other things slip. Okay, I get that. That's fine from an authenticity standpoint. That's fine from a common sense standpoint. But I gotta say, mechanics and good game design trump common sense every day of the week. And unfortunately, what that means is that every time you get out of a main mission, you're probably going to end up being a menace again, which means you have to rebuild your damn... What the hell? You have to rebuild your damn reputation over and over and over again. And it feels like a constant battle. Now, some people would argue that that's a good thing. It's like, yeah, that's Spider-Man. Yeah, that's the way Spider-Man's supposed to be. Okay, I understand that. But I feel like it is a deliberately malicious mechanic designed to try and extend the lifespan of the game because, frankly, the actual story content and proper scripted stuff is fairly minimal. There's not a lot of it. I mean, you even saw it in the challenge list there. There's only 14 story missions. And they can be beaten pretty fast, for the most part. So I think they put this mechanic in to force you into a situation where you would have to do these side missions, and you can't just avoid them. And if you do, it becomes a giant nuisance. So, I don't know. I think that's a very aggressive way of doing things. And frankly, I don't think it's a very good idea. Alright. I would show you the stealth system, but I'd rather show you the punching the hell out of these guys system instead. I'm going to show you the stealth system later. It's fairly basic anyway. Just sneak up behind, do a stealth takedown. Now, since these missions are the majority of the content you will be exploring, I suppose the question is, are the missions actually any good? There is a decent amount of variety past the first few hours. The first few hours are just petty thugs, petty thugs, petty thugs, more petty thugs. And eventually it opens up and actually gives you some more stuff to do, which is good, because I was really worried that the side quest would be just beat up 5 thugs over and over and over again. Not only that, but especially in the deadlock battles, they have some kind of mini-bosses, which are fairly enjoyable to play against, at least most of them are anyway. And it's a little easier than just doing the whole, hey, evade, 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 evade nonsense that you're dealing with when you end up fighting these guys. Now, the question is, what's the combat system like? Well, it is pretty much a discount Arkham. A lot of games are going this way these days, and I understand why, because the system is fairly good, but I don't necessarily think it actually fits with Spider-Man all that well. Now, yes, you definitely look very acrobatic while you're doing it, but the combat certainly lacks the weight that you would otherwise see from Batman. It seems a little easier as well. You generally don't have to worry too much about the direction that you're pressing. Just pressing X will automatically lock you onto the nearest enemy and attack. Evasion is fairly simplistic. Obviously, you get your spider sense warnings and things like that. These guys are idiots for not even noticing me here and forgetting that I was even there, so there you go, but that's amusing anyway. And outside of that, it is just hammer X and Y. And as long as you can do that, you shouldn't take any damage outside of a lot of ranged enemies or anything that has a special move of some description. Now, you can disarm. Or you can do stealth takedowns, you can do web pulls, and there's a couple of other moves you can unlock, but not a lot. Compared to the number of gadgets and movesets and combos that you can unlock in a Batman game, this title is not even close, and it does mean that the combat is extremely simplistic. Also, every time you complete a mission, you get a bloody news report, and most of them are exactly the same and completely inaccurate. It's like, that's a picture of me beating up a goon in broad daylight. What the hell? Frankly, I hope that they're just making some witty social commentary on the state of manufactured sensationalist news broadcasting, but somehow I find that unlikely. I don't think the game is that smart. Oh dear. That definitely gets annoying after a while. I understand the first time around, it's like, oh, that's kind of cool, and then you realize, oh, it's going to keep doing this, and it's going to keep using the same few news reports over and over again. Oh, jeez. Yeah, that can certainly be somewhat annoying. Yeah, I mean, the combat is serviceable. I've not felt cheated at any point. The combat is certainly fair. It gives you adequate time to get out of the way. But outside of some fairly basic stuff that you can unlock, like this seismic attack, which I got, which is some, like, gauntlet tech that I got from the first boss, there's not a lot to unlock. This is what the upgrade screen looks like, as you can see. Not exactly Arkham, is it? Yeah, a lot of this is, you know, I'd obviously get boost immediately. All of this stuff is for moving around, and getting boost makes the game much more enjoyable. Thankfully, you get that very early on. But it's like an entire tree for the seismic blast, which increases its effectiveness. There's one for web pulls, weapon jams, and things like that. And these are all relatively easy to execute, as you can probably imagine. And that's kind of about it. And you unlock that with experience. So that's all there is to it, really. You can also do web shots, which will kind of goo up an enemy and prevent them from moving. And you've got so-called signature moves, which can be executed once your combo gets high enough, which is just finishes, and that's, you know, not particularly difficult to do. And that's really about it in terms of the combat. Very simple. It's modified by the suit that you're wearing, and I have 2 suits right now. This one is probably the best one. It gives a big damage boost, and you'll notice that you get a huge boost in terms of the percentages whenever you go hero. I'm pretty sure some of the suits probably give you a bonus when you go menace as well. But in this case, it's very much, hey, let's just boost you because you're doing nice things. Frame rate is dropped to hell here, by the way. It's actually dropped below 30, which is just kind of disgusting. So, I apologize if you see jerky gameplay. It is not my fault, trust me. It is the game, very much so. So what else is there to do? Well, I mean, there's open world exploration. And most of the time, open world exploration and how good it is defined by how much there is to do outside of just general side activities. Pretty much every open world game has a bunch of side activities. That's the reality of the situation. That's how a lot of these games are built. That you could even argue is a fault of the genre. You know, it's something that maybe the genre needs to try and fix because open world games are very padded. The problem is there's nothing emergent going on in Amazing Spider-Man 2 in any way, shape, or form. Nothing. Where the hell is this rescue?
If I don't make it to the fundraiser soon,
yeah, okay, you can quit complaining about that. I don't even know where this guy is.
Spider-Man, anything you can do about this?
Alright, thankfully. There we go. He looks fine! He should be able to just crawl out himself. He's not even stuck. Look at him! Look at him! Good. That is a good question, actually. I don't know if there is anything I can do about it. I guess I could try and pull the train out of the way. There we go. That should do the job. That's probably extremely dangerous, but never mind. I'm sure I can sort him out. So yeah, there's nothing emergent about it whatsoever. There's no kind of chaos that you can cause. The only thing that happens in the open world outside of the missions, which more often than not teleport you to the right place anyway. A lot of them you either ride a fire engine to get there, or a helicopter, or a police car, or, you know, they just straight up teleport you. Are the little task force things, which happen when you become a menace, you know, and they'll just kind of attack you on sight, so you just try and avoid them, that's it. All of the population of the city and everything is just complete window dressing. Nothing else really happens. The actual villains don't interact in any way with the city, as far as I can tell. Everything seems heavily scripted. You don't have, say, a gang running amok. You noticed earlier when I was doing that deadlock thing. I've done that deadlock thing 3 times in the same area already. Oh, the bus station's under attack yet again, somehow. I don't know how that happens. But it did. They really like that bus station for whatever reason. So there's nothing emergent going on, so the city feels dead. Right? Compare that to something like Just Cause or Prototype, where the city feels very much alive, and you can interact with it, and you can just kind of go off and do your own thing. This is more of a theme park where it says, here are the rides, do not deviate, unless you really like web swinging, which I kind of do. Honestly, it feels pretty good. But, yeah, that I think is the core problem to the game. I do feel that the way that they generate the missions and force you to do them in order to not become a nuisance and just make the game more difficult and annoying is a particularly poor way of handling things. I do believe that, yes, there are definitely plenty of games where it would benefit from giving you a sense of immediacy and saying, you know what, you can't wait around, you've got to do this stuff. But funnily enough, it's telling me I got to get there because I'll be late. You never will be. You'll never be late to a main mission. You can't fail those. The only thing you'll be late to is one of these petty crimes. So it's kind of weird. You'd think it would be the opposite of that, but of course you can't fail a main mission. That would be horrible. Alright, so this one is a little bit of a quick time event. So you've got to get around the side, pull the guy with the gun out, and then rescue the civilian. That's pretty much about it. And then just hit the right quick time event. They do, I've got to give them credit, they do give a reasonable amount of variance when it comes to that. They really, oh, god damn. Wow, he shot him in the face. That's pretty rough. Actually took more damage than the baseball bat last time, I think, though. They do vary up the quick time events. They don't make them all exactly the same. Like the thing with the shotgun in the front, that's not the same as the last car chase that I did. So that's particularly cool. And I like the fact that not every single one of these events is identical. They did put a decent amount of effort into actually putting some variety in, which is good, but still, it's still a quick time event. It's got a nice feel to it, don't get me wrong, and it's nice that they vary up the mechanics somewhat, instead of just doing straight up, oh hey, you've got to beat these guys up. But it's still a QTE, and those who hate QTEs, well, it's going to be hard to argue otherwise. So yeah, it's a theme park of sorts. It's a bunch of missions that are loosely tied together. A bunch of side missions, which involve teleporting around the city, making the actual navigation of the city ultimately pointless. and a fairly basic Arkham Light combat system that doesn't really seem particularly inspired. I'm being a bit down on the game, but what I will say is that navigating the city is very pleasurable. I think that the web swinging mechanics work well. For the most part, they make you attach onto the actual side of the building, which is not what the Amazing Spider-Man did in the first place, which is good. However, they do still allow you to pull some serious BS, like this kind of boost thing. Like that, for instance. What did that attach to? That didn't attach to anything. So, there's a bit of weird stuff going on with that. And you can also do so-called web rush, which allows you to sort of teleport to different parts of the buildings. I like the fact that it sort of varies things up there, but really, I'd prefer for them to focus on the web swinging. And actually, web swinging seems to be one of the least efficient ways of actually getting where you need to go, simply because the web rush, you can keep spamming forever and just be catapulted across the tops of the buildings in a straight line, as opposed to actually having to time your swings. That said, again, the actual swinging, really fun. Very enjoyable. And navigating the city is a blast. I turned motion blur off, but motion blur actually looks pretty good. The reason I turned it off is, of course, it makes YouTube videos look pretty bad because it causes a whole lot more artifacting than usual. But, yeah, I mean, the web swing's kind of great. You know, you get a good amount of momentum going on. Once you get the boost, it's really fun to do as well. Yes, you're gonna miss the fundraiser. Don't worry, they will wait for you because video games. We'll stay away from that, actually, because I don't want to start that mission at all. This is all good, but again, the city feels dead. It's a dull city to look at. It's a bad representation of New York, in my honest opinion. How you make New York boring, I don't really know. And the navigation just seems to be superfluous. Again, it's filler because you get teleported to all of these events anyway. So in reality, it's not like, oh, something's happening in Harlem. No, something's happening at the generic bus station that you get teleported to when you jump on the helicopter. And I'm pretty sure they wouldn't let you jump on the damn helicopter. So that's the real problem, isn't it? You know, it's actually, as weird as it sounds, outside of interacting with the task force, this is basically a giant open world menu. And that's not how you do an open world game. You're gonna make the world feel alive and actually give you emergent gameplay and things that you can do within the world outside of your set activities. And other games do that much, much better, and this game does it really, really badly. And I think that's what I'd identify to be the biggest problem with it. Outside of that, I'm just annoyed by the nuisance level of these events. Like, as I've said before, I think it's a badly conceived system, which is a shame because I think that that sense of immediacy is kind of required in places, but this is not the way to do it at all, I'm afraid. It absolutely is not. And it's a weird alignment system as well. I kind of give them credit for trying something new instead of saying, oh yeah, both paths are viable. It's like, no, you're supposed to be a hero, so be a bloody hero. But being a hero is apparently a real chore. And I shouldn't feel that way. But I do, I'm afraid. I absolutely do. Alright, this one looks to be exactly the same. Oh, actually, not identical. No, he's got a different gun. Now, what do I think of it as a Marvel game? Well, I'm not hugely into Marvel comics, honestly. I don't find them to be massively enthralling. I'm just not into comics all that much in general. It has that feeling of authenticity, besides the fact that they shoehorned Stan Lee in as the comic book store owner, which is a huge, huge immersion breaker. It's like, great, we see Stan Lee yet again. There's no way this is the case, but they're gonna pull that on you anyway. He even does the voice acting himself, which I guess is kind of cool from a fan servicey standpoint, but frankly, god damn it, it's kind of ridiculous. There's plenty of villains. Give them credit for that. There's actually a hell of a lot of different villains, most of whom I don't really recognize. But they certainly have a rogues gallery. I'll give them credit for that. So there's a decent amount of variety there. The character acts like Spider-Man. He's got all of his ridiculous quips. He starts the game kind of dealing with the death of his uncle, as always, and he never really becomes too vengeful. He's always kind of ridiculous quipper, and it's weird because it clashes. There's actually this huge disconnect, this dissonance between the way that he acts in combat and then the kind of cutscene immediately afterwards where he's obviously like really emotionally distraught over the death of his uncle, and before that he's just making quips about them being the biggest losers and them not even trying and things like that. Just, I don't know, there's a weird dissonance there. And I think for those of you who care about the character of Spider-Man, that's probably going to be a factor. I'm not a person that really cares too much about story. I focus more on mechanics, but even that caught me as a little bit weird. I don't know what was going on with that. I'd also like to point out that the enemies have a tendency of repeating the same phrases over and over and over again. It gets really annoying. I mean, I've heard probably, "You're all tricks," about 20 times in maybe like a half an hour period when dealing with the thugs. And then they've got the stereotypical Russian thugs and things like that. Oh, man. Yeah, I mean, I'm criticizing this game a lot, but, you know, at the end of the day, it is supposed to be a AAA title. Spider-Man actually has a fairly decent history in terms of video games, and unfortunately, this one is really not up to scratch, and it's just not a particularly good open-world game. I could forgive a lot of this if the game wasn't, one, a bad port and ran terribly on my computer, and many others as well. Don't worry, I did do my due diligence. The Steam forum is full of complaints about performance on many different setups. Like, that's kind of ridiculous. But also the fact that the game is a bit buggy, too. I encountered several scenarios where I got stuck in terrain, which was in itself pretty ludicrous. And one really fun encounter where I had to beat up 3 thugs, and one of them became invisible when I hit him, and just stayed perma-stunned, and the model disappeared from the screen. I couldn't complete the mission, I had to restart it. It was ludicrous. Absolutely bloody ludicrous. Also, nighttime is so bloody dark. Thankfully, of course, you have Spider Sense, which, by the way, doesn't actually have any downsides. So you might as well have this on pretty much all the time. It makes the enemies easier to see, but it does, of course, make the game look pretty hideous, so I don't know why you'd really bother with that. So, yes, Amazing Spider-Man 2 is not amazing. It is laden with issues. If they sort the porting issues out, and if it gets on sale at some point, which it's an Activision game, so it's probably not going to be discounted too well, I'm afraid. I mean, hell, just look at the Activision sale right now. It's like 33% off on a lot of these games. Like, really? That game's been out for years. Like, Fall of Cybertron's been out for a number of years, and they're doing a 33% off sale. It's like, oh, it's only $40. I'm like, you what? Activision don't really seem to get the whole Steam sale thing as much as other companies do, I've got to say, which is a little ridiculous. But if it's heavily discounted, and if they fix the porting issues, then it's a kind of a decent time if you just want to play a Spider-Man game. Just bear in mind that you're in kind of a lifeless New York City. The combat system is serviceable at best, as is the stealth system, which is required in certain levels. Funnily enough, I actually had a decent amount of fun on one of the stealth levels. The stealth system is really basic. It's like, stay out of sight, hit the takedown button whenever you get the opportunity to do so, and don't get spotted too much, because otherwise you'll insta-fail the mission when the bar reaches full. But no, it was a decent good time, because the actual indoor section was fairly well designed, and you can't just swing around everywhere. You got to be a little bit careful. Sneak around walls. It reminded me of the earlier Alien vs Predator games, playing as an alien actually, and it worked pretty well. I like the whole web crawling aspect of it. But it's, you know, I wouldn't even call it necessarily an average open world game. It's not a very good open world game, but it is an average Spider-Man game that is a decent amount of fun. I've certainly had my moments on it. I think swinging around the city is the most enjoyable thing you can do, but there's nothing to do when you do that outside of going to those preset missions. And as I said, the design behind the way the mission system works and the way the alignment system works is ill-conceived, in my honest opinion. It seems like they went in there with the best of intentions to try and put that sense of urgency and authenticity on there, but frankly, it ends up just being a frickin' nuisance, and that is the last thing you want in an open-world game. It is a game that's saying to you, oh, you like your open-world freedom? Well, let me restrict that for you with arbitrary timers and nonsense like that. And not do it particularly well either. You know, this is no Dead Rising when it comes to timed events. Amazing Spider-Man 2, ladies and gentlemen. You can pick it up if you wish on Steam for $40, your original equivalent. It's also available on pretty much every console. Last gen, current gen, handhelds. Much more expensive, of course, on the next gen consoles. After 4 hours, of course, my first impression is that I'm just saying, no, I've had, this is a lot of filler and not a huge amount of killer, I'm afraid. The really cool moments that I've had have been very much overshadowed by the problems that the game has, and just these kind of generic, boring missions that are played out the same way over and over and over again, and just serve to pad out the experience unnecessarily. Alright folks, there you go. Amazing Spider-Man 2, currently available on Steam, next gen, current gen, and mobile platforms. My name is TotalBiscuit. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.